Hello, it's Aaron Wren. Welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Jesse Rine, who's the director of the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing at American Reformer. He's also the creator of a fantastic new online guide to Christian colleges that we are going to talk about today. There is a link to that in the show notes. You will 100% want to check that out. He has a PhD in higher education administration from the University of Virginia and is actually the editor of a peer-reviewed journal on Christian higher education. So this guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to Christian colleges. Again, he's joining me today to talk about the state of Christian higher education and also to show off the guide a little bit. So Jesse, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron.
I guess the first question is, what is a Christian college?
So the term Christian higher education is used to describe a wide range of faith-based institutions. And the Department of Education's integrated post-secondary data system shows there are over 850 self-identified religious institutions in America. Now, it's important to note that this group includes both historically church-related colleges and universities, those schools that are actively supported by a Catholic religious order or a Protestant denomination, as well as non-denominational religious institutions. So, it's a straightforward question: what is a Christian college? But because there is such diversity within Christian higher education when it comes to institutional commitments and educational approaches, I think it's helpful to divide those 850 institutions into two broad categories, using terms that were coined by Dwayne Litvin, the former president of Wheaton College. So the first term is the umbrella institution. And at an umbrella institution, the college or university provides a Christian canopy under which a critical mass of voices that represent the sponsoring tradition can flourish, but they also make room for contrary voices, folks that don't share the faith perspective, maybe even oppose in some ways the faith perspective of the sponsoring denomination. Now, this model is typically used by Catholic institutions in mainline. There are some exceptions. When we talk about Christian colleges, though, most people mean systemic institutions. So these are institutions that integrate the faith tradition of the sponsoring church or denomination throughout the organization. And they do this by requiring they only hire faculty. They require them to be professing Christians, same with their senior administrators, and they engage the world of ideas from the particular Christian tradition that sponsors the institution. And so most of the colleges that are systemic are evangelical, although there are some Catholic institutions, the ones that you would likely see in something like the Newman Guide. So when we say Christian college at CAFF, at my organization, we think about those institutions that follow the systemic model.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to throw something out there for you. What do you classify Hillsdale College as? Is that a Christian college? Because it comes up a lot. People say that a lot of debate around that.
Yes, it does. And full disclosure, I completed the first 2 years of my undergraduate studies at Hillsdale. So I'm a fan of Hillsdale, but generally speaking, it does not follow the accepted definition of a systemic Christian college, because Hillsdale does not require its full-time faculty to be professing Christians. That said, Hillsdale has re-emphasized aspects of its identity that are Christian over the past decade or so under the leadership of Larry Arnn. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with Christ Chapel, which is a beautiful, award-winning chapel that has been built. It cost nearly $30 million, which is a pretty strong statement about the values of the institution. And so while Hillsdale doesn't subscribe to the systemic model, they are very supportive of Christianity, and I think Christian students and faculty can certainly flourish there.
Yeah. So when you talk about the umbrella model, is this mostly like liberal arts colleges that are denominationally affiliated, like there's a bunch of colleges that are sort of still affiliated with the Presbyterian Church in the USA, like Alma College in Michigan or Hanover College in Indiana. They even have a lot of Presbyterian ministers on their boards and stuff like that. But they're really just liberal arts colleges.
Yes.
Is that it, or is that another different kind?
Yes, they typically present as liberal arts colleges with a religious heritage,
Yeah.
and so the religious identity is more historical,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more kind of at arm's length. These institutions will often still have a chapel on campus, but in some of them, it's functions essentially as an interfaith center where you could have different faith traditions worshiping there. They don't tend to have required chapel programs for students. So there's certainly a respect for religion and an appreciation and some touch points, but it's not as all pervasive a character as you would find at a systemic institution.
Mm. And, my understanding again, those colleges I named, were like most of the colleges in America. They were religious colleges. I think most colleges in America started out as religious colleges in some way, including like Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, and all those
Yes.
places. Obviously, they're not today. But where did this like current concept of what we think of as the Christian college, which again I think most people think of this evangelical systemic institution, where did that come from, and how did that develop?
Well, while it's obvious that kind of Christian spirituality has evolved in America since colonial times, I personally like to say that America's evangelical colleges carry forward the spiritual legacy of the earliest American institutions. So, as you mentioned, the colonial colleges were all founded as explicitly Christian, and they followed the Oxbridge model that was imported from England. So this model grew out of the medieval cathedral schools that were forerunners to the modern university. And within these schools, they were dominated by a Christian worldview supported by the Roman Catholic Church. And they believed that truth was unified and singular. God was its ultimate source, and faith was a prerequisite to knowledge. They also viewed the various academic disciplines as different ways or avenues for ascertaining truth. So while much of American higher ed is secularized, this subset of systemic Christian colleges carry forward that spiritual legacy. So the earliest American colleges cared about moral development. In fact, Harvard was founded with the explicit purpose of training both civil servants and pastors, right? And so the way that I view it is that our understanding of a Christian institution today, a systemic institution, they hire faculty that teach from that tradition. They want students to develop a Christian worldview. They want to integrate faith and learning into their teaching, and they want to intentionally shape the spiritual development of their students. I guess the last thing I would say is that, there are organizations that grew up in the mid to late 20th century. One of them is the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. It was founded in 1976. And around these organizations, there was a coalescing of ideas about, okay, how do we, with a number of institutions separating from their sponsoring denominations or no longer embodying that character, what are the characteristics of this? And that's where a lot of the professionalization became instituted, and some of the definitions that for decades in American higher ed didn't have to be made explicit began to take shape.
So how many Christian colleges are there in this sort of systemic sense of the word?
Sure. So you mentioned our CAFF college guide, and I think it's easy to look at institutions that we included as kind of the core of these institutions. So we looked at members of the three major national Christian higher ed associations: the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, the International Alliance for Christian Education, and the Association for Biblical Higher Education. So there's 259 institutions that belong to at least one of those three associations. Then there are probably another 100 or so institutions that are evangelical Protestant and are systemic, but they choose for whatever reason not to belong to one of those associations. And you could also include some Catholic institutions that follow a more systemic model. So of that 850 institutions I mentioned before that self-identify as religiously affiliated in the Department of Education's database, I would say that maybe 35 to 40% of those institutions could be classified as Christian colleges as we're defining them.
You hear a lot about the problems facing higher education today on a number of fronts. How are Christian colleges faring?
Well, you're right. There are a lot of major challenges with higher education. And I would say within the sector, there's a range of performance. But I think that two of the biggest challenges are trends that face Christian colleges that we really need to pay attention to. So the first is the crisis of public confidence that we have in this country when it comes to higher education. So just a decade ago, 57% of Americans had either a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in American higher education. And that number has dropped to only 36% today, which is a major problem for the industry as a whole that Christian higher ed operates within. And the reasons for this span kind of concerns about political agendas that are being pushed in the classroom. That typically is what Republicans or conservatives worry about. On the left, there are concerns about runaway college cost. But the bottom line is that this is a significant concern to justify why someone should consider college. It really gets at the public perception of the value that's offered by American higher education. And then the other trend that I'd like to mention is the fact that fewer students are going to college, right? So we have a relatively constant amount of educational supply, but there's a decrease in the amount of student demand. And this is both demographic and attitudinal in nature. So in terms of demographics, after 9/11, there was a drop in fertility in the US. Fewer people had children. So you add 18 years, you get up to around 2019. That's when folks were worried about the so-called demographic cliff. And COVID actually provided a bit of a reprieve because institutions were able to receive federal funding to help tide them over. And a number of students decided to take a gap year. So that pent up a little bit of excess demand. We saw that in 2021, 2022. Now we're basically coming into this demographic cliff period. And not only, I mentioned it was demographic and attitudinal. So not only are fewer students of college age, but fewer of them within that cohort are deciding to go to college. There's basically been, this a loss of confidence among college age students. And they're looking at non-traditional pathways to the workforce through vocational routes or other options. And college is not just the assumed way that you that you can have a good life. All right, folks are questioning that. So what we're seeing in terms of how Christian colleges are faring is that the ones that are providing contrast are doing pretty well. To survive in this environment, you have to provide something that is different and more compelling than what you're going to find in the wider academy, especially since there's typically an economic premium that you have to pay to go to a private college over a public institution. And the good news for Christian higher ed is that we have growing evidence of institutions that are doubling down on their Christian identities, reaping enrollment gains. So there was an article yesterday by Sarah Weissman in Inside Higher Ed that talked about this trend in both Protestant and Catholic higher education. So In our view, the winning strategy for survival in the midst of these two negative trends is to lead boldly and to provide clear contrast.
Yeah, so sort of like, put it in marketing speak, segment the market and sharpen your differentiation versus the competition to, have your unique selling proposition or whatever to that group of people who cares about certain things.
Yes.
There, yeah, it makes me think of the Tyler Cowen average is over. Just being like everybody else is not a good recipe for success in a lot of domains today. Now, one thing, go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's right. And what's interesting is that many Christian colleges are finding that even families and prospective students that in the past would not have looked at an evangelical Christian institution for college, they're starting to come and say, we don't agree with everything that you stand for, but we know that our son or daughter will receive a good education here. It'll be a safe environment that's conducive to learning. And so it's really interesting to see that not only do you perform better with your most natural constituencies, but you can enlarge your appeal.
Yeah. And one thing I have noticed when I visited Christian college campuses is the student body seems to skew very heavily female. College in general is like 60-40 female, but these feel like they're like 70% or more female in some cases. Am I making that up, or how is the gender ratio in these schools compared to a regular college?
No, you're exactly right. The latest number that I saw for Christian higher ed was 60-40 women to men. And surprisingly, the rest of the academy has kind of come and towards Christian higher education. 2 decades ago, the ratio was the same, 60-40 women to men. So this is a kind of a structural issue that has been in place for some time. And, it's interesting to see how Christian colleges have tried to attract more men. Many of them have added more athletic programs, especially football, or they've added academic programs like engineering that appeal more to men. And they're certainly trying to sharpen their marketing in ways that will appeal. And I see this as a growth opportunity for Christian higher education because the Christian vision provides kind of a unique advantage in that it views both masculinity and femininity as essential elements of God's good design. And this stands in stark contrast to what men have been told at many public universities, that their masculinity is something that is toxic and should be kind of mitigated. So I see that as an opportunity, but it has been a long-term trend within Christian higher education. The rest of the academy is just catching up now to that ratio.
One thing people tell me is that these Christian families are like, well, our son can go to State U, but we want to protect our daughter. We'll send her to the Christian college. Is that true? Or is there any info on that? Or is that like?
Well, yes, I do think that is a motivation for many Christian families. They don't want their sons or daughters to lose their faith. And, you can get a good education at a public institution if you stay connected to a Bible-believing church and a local parachurch ministry. But the difference there is you're going in with your guard up. You understand that you're likely going to have professors that think differently. And as long as there isn't kind of rampant discrimination, you can move forward and keep your faith intact. What's a little more challenging is when you choose an institution that you think is Christian, and then you get there and things undermine kind of your perspective if the institution is not as committed to the same values. And so parents and students have to be pretty savvy whenever they're comparing institutions and really drill down to some of the specifics of institutional character.
I think it's long been known that Christian college faculty are more liberal than the families who send their kids there. And I've heard a lot of controversies and complaints about different Christian colleges going woke, whatever that means. What's going on here? Are these colleges really like going squishy, or is that overblown?
Well, yes, I think that it's actually a problem that we have within the academy writ large, right? So, recent studies have shown that 9 out of every 10 faculty members identify as politically liberal, and that's in sharp contrast to how things were 50 years ago, when essentially the ratio was 50-50, right? So, if we understand that structural issue, Christian college faculty, by and large, are trained in public secular research universities for their terminal degrees. We have very few R1 research institutions within Christian higher education. And so, um, while you're right, faculty at Christian colleges tend to be a little more conservative than the wider academy. They are going to be to the left of most students that come from Christian families, and I think that ultimately, one of the other challenges we have with this structural issue is that um, academic work is done through peer review and consensus. And so, if I'm more conservative than my peers in a doctoral program and in the guild that I have joined, I'm going to feel pressure to have points of contact with the dominant frameworks and ideologies in my field. And so when there's a major cultural shift like what we saw in 2020, faculty who are who identify perhaps more strongly with their academic guild than they do with their home institution could push to move things in the direction that the culture is moving. Maybe not as as severely, but certainly as an echo. And we did see this in the summer of 2020. Many Christian colleges issued statements decrying systemic racism, and some even promised programming to deal with this issue. And national higher ed associations, the most prominent ones, all issued statements about this and promoted anti-racist resources and authors like Linda D'Angelo and Ibram X. Kendi. And it's interesting now, a lot of colleges have backtracked from that, Christian colleges, because I think they've realized the problems that were inherent in that approach. But there certainly are institutions that are much further left in the constituencies that they serve.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing, or CAFF, that you run. What is CAFF and what is its purpose?
So we're an independent nonprofit research center supported by American Reformer. And in a nutshell, our goal is to strengthen authentically Christian higher education by supporting those institutions that are swimming against the cultural tide. We endeavor to achieve this mission through 3 broad strategies. First, we want to reassert institutional faithfulness by developing a cohesive and credible counter-narrative over against the false ideologies that undermine Christian higher education. So, as I mentioned, with the academic guild and kind of the leftward pressure that most feel in higher education, we want to try to provide a bit of a counter-narrative that emboldens and strengthens and resources Christian institutions so that they can be confident in their identities and not feel like they have to just offer what I call baptized facsimiles of the dominant models. We want to try to help these institutions engage in Christian self-determination and lead from their mission and identity, and provide a unique model that provides a contrast and a differentiated product out in the educational marketplace. So the first strategy, as I said, we want to reassert institutional faithfulness. Secondly, we want to redesign organizational networks. So Post 2020, the commercial has become incredibly political, and we've seen for-profit businesses try to leverage the uniqueness of their product in the marketplace to move nonprofit and conservative institutions off their mission. And so what we would like to do is connect Christian colleges and universities to ideologically aligned exchange partners that basically will enable them to reduce the threat of cancellation risk, debanking, deplatforming, et cetera. That's a longer term strategy that we would like to pursue, but it's something that we care about. We see it as a real threat to mission and identity over in the negative world, essentially. And then the third thing that we want to do is reinvigorate institutional flourishing. So we would like to offer products and initiatives that help authentically Christian institutions with their financial health, their enrollment management, their good governance. And the guide that you mentioned before is one example, and we have a few other things that I can talk about if you like, how we're addressing that as well.
Yeah, and there is a link to CAFF in the show notes, or there should be. I'll validate that when I look. I know there's one to the college guide. I'll make sure I got one to CAFF in there. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't just say, in full disclosure, I'm a senior fellow at American Reformer, so have a connection to this work. And are there any initiatives at CAFF you'd like to highlight before we take a quick look at the guide?
Sure. Well, the main initiative that we have been involved with, in addition to the research for the guide, which was extensive, is our white paper series. So we actually developed 3 different types of white papers. The first is position papers, which cast vision for how Christian higher education can address pressing challenges. We've published 3 of those so far. One that I wrote that looked at kind of the history of the development of the American system of higher education and kind of traced how we got to where we are today and what that means for Christian higher ed. And it's titled Meeting the Moment, Reconstituting Christian Higher Education for a New Era. And then we have another piece that was authored by Robert Manzer, president of the American Academy for Liberal Education. It's the accreditor for great books programs. And he wrote a piece on accreditation at the crossroads, understanding the threats and opportunities for Christian colleges as major institutional accreditors have codified DEI standards. It has posed a threat to institutional identity and mission for Christian higher ed. And Rob cast vision for a way forward using the accreditation marketplace that was created in the first Trump administration under Secretary Betsy DeVos. The final paper that we've published is a piece on the anti-fragile Christian college, turning disadvantage into opportunity or disruption into opportunity. That was authored by Nate Fisher. And he looks at some macro trends that are going to face American higher education writ large over the next few years. And he casts vision for how Christian higher ed can fork from the legacy status hierarchy and provide something that is different and serve constituencies that align with their mission and their identity. And so I'll just mention that there are 2 other series of white papers that we will be inaugurating here in the next few months. One is research reports, which will present empirical studies that analyze data and provide information to support good policy and practice. The first entry in that series will be an almanac of Christian higher education that I'm working on right now and to release in the early spring of 2025. And then the third series is going to be called the Guide Series. And what we want to do with this series of white papers is to illuminate key issues in Christian higher education for a non-specialist audience. So folks like board members at Christian colleges that are coming from outside of higher education, and also the general public. So one of the first guides that we're going to release likely in December, so next month, is a guide to academic freedom in the Christian college context. There are a lot of misunderstandings about where the lines are, what that means, and so we want to try to clarify that and resource boards and the general public around those topics. So that's we've been busy with the white papers, and then the research for the guide has been pretty extensive. So that's the other major initiative that was just released 20 days ago.
Yeah, so I definitely want to take a look at the guide, and we're not going to do a long demo here because most people are going to be listening on audio only. But I want to point out this guide is free to access. It's at christiancollegeguide.com. You just basically have to create an account and fill out a brief survey, and then you can knock yourself out. And when you say it's a guide, like that basically doesn't do it justice. It's basically a comprehensive database, everything about these colleges. So I'm going to throw it up on the screen here, but then just ask, like, where did this come from? How did you get the idea for this?
Well, the college search process can be overwhelming for Christian families. And yet it's a decision that has major implications for both a family's finances and a young person's adult life. So that's kind of on the demand side. On the supply side, Christian colleges on average are 70% tuition dependent. That means 70 cents out of every dollar come from student tuition fees, room and board. So it's really important for the long-term health and flourishing of Christian colleges that they're able to recruit a strong class of students. So what we wanted to do is to try to connect faithful Christian families to faithful Christian institutions. And we wanted to make the college search process easier for prospective students by bringing all of the relevant data under one roof, a one-stop shop, so to speak. Many parents have told us that it's exhausting and difficult trying to dig through college websites and find answers to relevant information that matters to their college choice. And no parent has the time to invest. The guide took us over 2,000 hours of research for our research team, and we've essentially tried to do that work for the general public, and we've presented it in an objective. We've taken an objective approach where we're not ranking or rating the institutions. We're just providing objective and accurate and comprehensive, trustworthy information so that we can resource parents and prospective students to make the value judgments about colleges that make the most sense given what they care about and what they're looking for.
Yeah, it seems like lots of people like to make rankings. What made you decide not to include rankings?
Well, there's a whole host of scorecards and rankings and things that are already out there. They tend to suffer from one of two problems. The first is the problem of relevance. They often don't include all of the information about the religious character of a Christian institution. They might look at one or two facets, but unless they're comprehensive, they really don't help you narrow down your search to a handful of institutions that are contenders that you should go look at in person and examine further. And then the other issue is the problem of bias, right? So anytime that you rank something, you are making certain value judgments about how to weight different characteristics. In fact, U.S. News and World Report is one of the most well-known rankings out there, and they adjust that model almost yearly, and they put more emphasis on certain things depending on what they think is what the trends in society and preference are. And we just feel like if we had ranked institutions, we would be making certain value judgments that may or may not serve all of the families that are interested in Christian higher ed. And we just had a sense of conviction that if we equip Christian families with relevant, objective, and trustworthy information, they will make the most appropriate value judgments for their sons and daughters.
Well, maybe we have it up on the screen here. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what's in it and how it works.
Yes.
We won't go too crazy on it, but we'll give people a sample.
So one of the things I've already signed in, just for your listeners to know, it is free. You go to christiancollegeguide.com. They'll ask you to enter an email address, which will serve as your login in the future. And you'll be sent a code that you'll then input. And from there, you'll set up a very brief user profile with some standard information that we're all accustomed to providing to different online products, your name, your zip code, et cetera. And then there's a very short survey that we ask all users to complete. The answers to this survey are going to not be connected to your personal information. They'll be just dealt with in the aggregate. It'll help us understand the Christian college market. And it's really an opportunity for users to have their perspectives heard and represented. And so once you've done that, you'll be asked to choose one of a set of basic filters. Here we go. I'm just, there we are. So there are 5 of them: geographic region, area of study, so that's like your major and minor, theological tradition, varsity sports, and total enrollment. So we ask you to pick one that is at least to kind of get you started. So we could go with geographic region, just for sake of example, and we could go to the Great Lakes region, which is the Upper Midwest. So there are 37 colleges that are located there. And so what will happen is it'll return your results. On the left-hand column, you'll see a number of other filters that you can use to narrow down your search. But once you feel like you have a nice group of institutions, then we recommend that you click on an institution and look at their full profile. And within the profile, you're going to see 7 different areas. It's just loading here. The first is as it loads, the basic profile, which will include things like when it was established. Here we go. It has the mission statement, the homepage, the theological tradition, the church or denomination, if there's a particular congregation that sponsors it. And notice that next to a few of the responses, there's a little icon. If you click on that, it will give you a note. So this is Bethel University in Indiana. It's in the Anabaptist tradition, and it is sponsored by the Missionary Church. You'll see if it belongs to which of the 3 associations I mentioned: CCCU, IACE, and ABHE, as well as its setting, its region, and the types of degrees that it offers. And there are also some kind of short form statistics that most people care about, things like in-state enrollment, total headcount, tuition and fees, and room and board. You'll notice also in the left-hand column that each one of these 7 areas have kind of an accordion drop-down menu that you can click on and go. If you click here, it takes you directly to that section. So the next section is institutional commitment. So this looks at affirmations and requirements. Here's where you're going to learn about whether the college has a statement of faith. If it does, what does it say about things like biblical authority, the divinity of Christ, traditional marriage, whether humans were created immutably male and female or not? Then it will tell you who's required to affirm those things in the statement of faith: the trustees, the senior admin, staff, faculty, and so on. I'm not going to hit each one of these, Aaron, but we'll just continue on. Inputs and outcomes is the third section. Here you're going to find all the admissions information that is typical for most college guides. So things like the percent admitted and whether there's a standardized test score requirement. We have the scores for the ACT and SAT. And then we have information about undergraduate enrollment by race and gender. So here at this institution, this is actually just the opposite. We have 57% men and 43 women. So there will be anomalies within
the Anabaptist. They're going They're with it on the drawing them in there.
Yes, yes. Um, and then student success. So what's the retention rate and the graduation rate, which are kind of standard metrics that people are interested in. The next section is called the student experience. And this is another section that is somewhat unique to our guide. It's going to get at the Christian character as students are going to encounter it in student housing policies, student behavioral expectations, how the college deals with diversity, whether they have an officially recognized LGBTQ student club, if they have a campus diversity office. And there's going to be a range of practice with these, but what we do is provide the basic information so that if this institution in particular is one that you think is a contender, you can drill down and understand more clearly exactly what the approach is. And finally, the student experience section concludes with an overview of the spiritual life program. So how many chapels are offered each semester, how many of them are required, and then which parachurch ministries are offered on campus. And then the next section that we have is the extracurriculars. So we list all of the varsity, both men's, women's, and co-ed sports, as well as any club sports that are offered, the athletic division that the institution competes in, and we have a list of all of the student clubs that are active on campus. You know, a way that you can really get a sense for a campus student culture is by seeing the kinds of clubs that students form and voluntarily maintain. So, and also which ones are, officially approved by the institution. And then we have two more sections. One is on academic life. This is where you're going to find the expectations for faculty, whether they're required to teach in accordance with the statement of faith, if biblical worldview is a requirement, an intentional requirement of the educational program. Do faculty have to provide a diversity statement to apply for a job there? And then we get into the composition, the size of the faculty, how many are full-time and part-time, as well as the average faculty salary. And then the other section that I think is of great interest in the academic life area for parents and students is the overall requirements in the general education program. So we list how many credits are required, how many in humanities, how many in Bible and theology, how many in diversity. And then we actually list out the names of the individual courses that are required of every student, regardless of major, in order to graduate. And looking at this kind of collection of information will really give you a sense of the imprint that the institution intentionally makes upon each one of its graduates.
This is an insane amount of work.
It was a lot of work, but we're really pleased with how it's turned out, and we've received so many positive comments from users. We already have 1,200 users with no real marketing, just some social media posting and word of mouth over the past 20 days, and our site has over 33,000 page views in 20 days. So folks are signing up, and I think the average number of page views per visit is just under 17. So we're getting the sense from users that this is very valuable. We've also had a lot of encouragement from the schools themselves. One of the reasons that we included the ABHE schools, these are the Bible colleges, these institutions have a slimmer curriculum on average, right? They tend to have fewer majors. Their bread and butter is in Bible and ministry, but they often also will offer things in education and in leadership and in counseling and social work. But these institutions are really standing firm within the culture and staying true to their mission. And so we wanted to raise visibility for them as well. And they see this as a really great opportunity to help the general public understand who they are and what they have to offer.
You're probably not going to like this, but like when I look at something like this, I just say this for me as like a journalist or a researcher, this is like a great tool. I can imagine any journalist wanting to use this tool to like pull basic information about schools that they're maybe running a story on. I can see colleges using it to check up on the competition. I mean, like
Yes.
it's a competitive database. I mean, there's a lot you can do with this thing besides
A-
just find out where your kids want to go to school. Although it's great for that. I mean, like everything you'd ever want to know, it's right there.
Yes, I actually would very much appreciate journalists and policymakers and others digging into our information. We would like to become um, a record of information that could be trusted and could be cited in stories and in research. We actually one other key thing that I should have mentioned earlier. Our process was to develop an objective methodology for examining the schools. So we have, like 150 variables in this data set, and we have definitions for each one of the measures, and then we consistently apply that objective methodology to the institutionally available information. And some of that is incomplete and some of it's out of date or can be out of date. So we actually reached out to every college in the database and gave them an opportunity to participate in a 2-month-long data review period this summer. When we review information, here's what we found, here are our definitions. And then if there's anything that needs to be added, any additional context, or if something needs to be corrected, provide the evidence for us, the documentation of a policy or a course catalog update or something, so that we can verify it, because essentially we're providing a data verification function for the general public, and we'll gladly update it. And the institutions that participated, we had about a third of them participate. You'll notice that some of the schools have a campus photo and a logo and their unique school colors. We invited all schools to provide that information. And so you'll see that the ones that have participated include those additional media assets. And one last thing that I'll say is if your listeners are interested in those data definitions, we want to be very transparent, unlike many of the rankings where you're not entirely sure how a school got the exact score they did. If you click on the data review participant icon that's at the top of the page, next to the campus photo in the bottom right-hand corner, you will actually be able to download a full PDF. It's 12 or 14 pages long with all of our measures and definitions.
Oh, wow.
So,
well, I mean, you coming, having a PhD in higher education administration and all of that, you have the chops and the training to be able to create good definitions for what these things should be. So I think that's great. Something that might be harder to do for someone who doesn't have a background in it. Well, this is wonderful. I'm gonna drop us off here, and I think it's great. I mean, this is a resource that I'm personally going to be using, and I think it's the most valuable thing of its type that I've seen. It's better than the U.S. News profiles, to be quite honest. I pull up a U.S. News profile of different colleges, and they've got stuff on it. I'm not saying it's not good, but this is like pretty dialed in and pretty comprehensive. So that's great. We're running out of the top of the hour here, so just wanted to, we'll probably should be wrapping up, but I just wanted to see if you had any concluding thoughts or anything I didn't ask you'd like to talk about.
I would just encourage your listeners to check out the site and to check out faithfulcolleges.org, which is CAFF's main website. You can get to the guide through faithfulcolleges.org or go directly to christiancollegeguide.com. Our goal is to expand this over time. We already have about a dozen new measures that we're evaluating to include. We want to make this guide as relevant as possible to users. And we'll also be adding more institutions. So we've had a few reach out to us who said, hey, we don't belong to any of these associations, but we qualify. We just choose not to be a part of them. Could we be included? And absolutely. So for institutions that are authentically Christian, systemic in their model. We want to have as many as possible represented here so that we can raise awareness and hopefully connect faithful Christian families to faithful Christian institutions.
Well, excellent. Again, my guest today has been Jesse Rine. He's the director of the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing at American Reformer. Jesse, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a pleasure.